Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So welcome back to the lecture series in animal physiology. So we are into the second lecture of the 12th week. So if you remember, in the last class we talked about the thyroid dysfunction, and we talked about the hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism. And if you look at it, so these are some of the hyperthyroidism symptoms which are enumerated here. Kindly go through it. And hypothyroidism, if you see, these are some. It's not essential that every patient of hypo or hyperthyroidism will go through these kind of things, but definitely one area where a lot of situation kind of occur, that is in the depression. They suffer from a lot of depression, that cold intolerance. This is also common in hypothyroidism, and definitely the heartbeat. So these are some of the very peculiar things. See, if you look at it, there is a slow heartbeat, whereas there is a rapid heartbeat. And there is heat intolerance, whereas there is cold intolerance. So there are several unique areas which the expertise or expert endocrinologist or clinical endocrinologist can tell you based on the symptoms. Okay. So from here, let's move on to the adrenal gland. Adrenal is located just at the top of the kidney out here. These two are the adrenal gland. If you see through the cross section of adrenal, the outer periphery is called as the cortex, as you could see, and the inner core is called the medulla. So here is the medullary region. So here you have the medullary region, and here you have the cortical region. And the cortical region could be further classified in different level: fasciculata, reticularis, and glomerulosa. Okay. So coming back, so here you have the glomerulosa, which is the outermost, then the fasciculata, and then the reticularis. So they are located like this, 3 more layers, and each one of these layers have a different function. Now the endocrine part of it, this is the medullary part, which is involved in secretion of hormone like adrenaline, noradrenaline, and these are the ones which are regulating the sympathetic nervous system, fear or fight or fright syndromes. Whereas the cortex is involved with glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and the sex hormones. They are secreted in a very small quantities, but it is still not clear that what is the function of the sex hormone which are secreted out here, which is androgen. So it's not really clear till this date. So now in terms of the mineralocorticoids, acts on the distal convoluted tubule of the renal nephrons, regulates the uptake of the sodium and acid base balance, lowers the blood glucose level, whereas glucocorticoids raises the blood glucose level and stimulate glucose production by cells, reducing inflammatory response and raise the blood glucose level. So what you can observe here is a very interesting part. There is a opposite reactions which are happening between glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids. Okay. So this is how the glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids functions. So now coming back, so again this is where you have the adrenal gland, adrenal medulla, adrenal cortex. Okay. And these are the short-term stress response because of the epinephrine and norepinephrine secreted by the adrenal medulla. If you remember in the previous section I told you. So this is where the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and that was the reason why I was not covering that sympathetic and parasympathetic. Whereas out here, hypothalamus releasing hormones, anterior pituitary secreting ACTH, ACTH now acting all the way at a distance, all the way at the cortex of the adrenal gland, asking it to secrete mineralocorticoids and the glucocorticoids. And I told you mineralocorticoids are involved in the retention of sodium ions and water by the kidneys, where it increases the blood volume and the blood pressure. contrary to that, glucocorticoids, proteins and fat broken down, converted to glucose, leading to increased glucose, blood glucose, and immune system may be suppressed. Okay, so keep these in mind. From here, we will move on to, this is a flow chart which will kind of give you an idea of different kind of actions of the hormonal system on the liver, beta cells, skeletal muscle, and so on and so forth. Okay, so from here we will move on to the digestive system. So if you look at the digestive system, so digestive system. So in the digestive system, this is where you have the mouth, breaks up the food particle, assists in producing, of course apart from language, secretes a whole bunch of chemicals which have different role, which are secreted by the salivary gland, saliva which is involved in the moistening and lubricating the food, and amylase which is helping in breaking the carbohydrates and the complex polysaccharides. The food in the form of peristaltic motion. So this is the windpipe which is showing it here, and you have the esophagus which is transporting the food in the form of peristaltic motion. Then this takes the food to the stomach where it stores and churns the food. Pepsin digests the protein. Of course, this is a very acidic zone because of the hydrochloric acid which activates the enzyme, breaks up the food, kills germs. Mucus protect the stomach wall and with limited absorption. From here, it moves all the way, while on the side you have the liver which helps in breakdown and buildup of many biological molecules, store vitamins and iron, destroyed old blood cells and destroys poison. So this is, liver is a kind of a purifying agent out there. Then you have the gallbladder which stores and concentrates bile. Now bypassing this and in between this pancreas which is hormones regulating the blood glucose level, bicarbonate neutralizes stomach acid, trypsin and chymotrypsin digest protein, amylase digest polysaccharides, and lipase digest the lipids. These are all secreted by the pancreas. The food moves to the small intestine where it completes the digestion. Mucus protects the gut wall, absorb nutrient, mostly the water which are being absorbed, and followed by that whatsoever residual is left, this moves to the large intestine, and from large intestine it is being thrown out of the body. Now if you look at all the digestive enzymes which are involved, here is a compact list which has been prepared for you people. Salivary amylase, pepsin, pancreatic amylase, trypsin, chymotrypsin, carboxypeptidase, pancreatic lipase. So this is where lipid maltase which is breaking the sugars, sucrase breaking the sugar, lactase breaking the sugar, aminopeptidase which is taking care of the amino acids. Okay, from here move on to the next slide. So this is how the peristaltic motion is taking place. The food is form of a bolus, and this bolus moves, and it's a narrow channel like this, but then once the food enters, so the motion is like this. So this is called the peristaltic motion there, carrying the food. Now this is your stomach, which is a very acidic zone as I told you, and it has series of circular muscle, oblique muscles, and it has a mucosal layer, submucosal layer, and this is which is called the gastric rugae, where you are having all the hydrochloric acid reactions are taking place there. Now this is how the gastric pits look like. This is where the HCl is being made instantaneously. So this is that mucus layer what we are talking about. This is the parietal cell, this is the Scheff's cells in the gastric pit, and this is the pit. This whole zone is where the pit is, and this is where most of the reaction is taking place. Now you can see the cross section of the pit like this when you have a three-dimensional cross section. And now if you look at it, the parietal cells of the gastric gland secrete HCl. The Scheff's cells secrete pepsinogen. In the acidic environment of gastric juice, pepsinogen is converted into active protein digesting enzyme called pepsin. So what is happening essentially is that HCl is never stored there. It is this chloride, if you see, co-transport of the chloride and the protons, H plus ions, which resulting in the formation of the HCl, and at a specific time this HCl is being secreted. Okay. Now coming to the liver function, as I told you, this is involved in detoxification, blood glucose regulation, bile drainage and synthesis, and storage of amino acids, protein, vitamins and fats. So this is called the hepatic portal vein. This is where the liver is kind of cross-talking with the blood vessels. Okay. So talking about the bile acids, bile functions, it is made in liver, stored in gallbladder, released in the duodenum, where it emulsifies fat. So the major job of bile is to emulsify fat. It's a hydrophilic and hydrophobic moieties, and then absorbed by the intestinal villi. Hydrophobic head, aqueous solution, hydrophobic tail. It's an amphoteric molecules, and the functions of the liver includes bile production around 600 to 1000 milliliter per day. Bile salts include bilirubin, that is the bile pigment that results from breakdown of hemoglobin, cholesterol, fats, fat-soluble hormone, lecithin, whereas it neutralizes and dilutes stomach acid. Bile salt emulsify this fat, this is I have already mentioned you, and secretin, which is from the duodenum, stimulates the bile secretion, increasing water and bicarbonate ion content of the bile. Whereas in terms of the storage, if we talk about glycogen, fat, vitamins, which is A, B, 12, D, E, K, copper and iron, hepatic portal blood comes to liver from small intestine, and the synthesis are of albumin, fibrinogen, globulins, heparins and clotting factors. Okay. So if you look at the whole thing, there are a series of functions which liver is doing. Now talking about the red blood cells, so this is how some of the reactions are taking place. Red blood cells hemolyzed in spleen and liver of the bone marrow, forming the hemoglobin. From hemoglobin, the heme moiety is removed from the iron. So it's something like this. So here the heme moiety is sitting. It's a more complex structure, I am not showing at this time, something like this. So if you remove the heme moiety is sitting here, and rest of the moiety without this is the heme moiety. Okay. So this heme moiety is converted into biliverdin. By NADPH action, it is converted into bilirubin, and bilirubin is taken by liver and conjugated bilirubin, forming the conjugated bilirubin. Whereas, on the other hand, there is a formation of carbon monoxide in case of carboxyhemoglobin, where this is another reaction where carbon monoxide react with the heme moiety. Okay. Now coming back to the structure, the other structure which was involved in this game was the pancreas, which has lot of hormonal functions involved with it. So if you look at the pancreas consists of alpha cells, beta cells, delta cells, PP cells. Okay, and they have their specific functions. So this is how the pancreatic ducts look like. So here you are having the alimentary canal moving through, and this is how the pancreatic islets, alpha, beta, exocrine, acinus. So this is where most of the secretions are taking place. Okay. So now the alpha cells are involved in the secretion of glucagon, beta cells are involved in the secretion of insulin, delta cells are involved in the secretion of somatostatin, exocrine, pancreas or acinar cells and the duct. So what you observe is that, and of course there is something called F cells which secrete pancreatic polypeptide. So these are the ducts. So all these cells secrete, and kind of this is where the secretion is taking place. Okay. Now insulin enters into the bloodstream from pancreas, glucose enter into the bloodstream from the digestive system and liver. So what happens is the healthy balance of glucose and insulin circulate in the bloodstream, because the insulin helps the glucose to be absorbed. So if insulin is not there, so in other words, the role of insulin is guiding the glucose molecule to a spot where it could be converted into glycogen and all other molecules. If insulin deficiency is there, what will happen is that, or insulin is non-functional, the glucose will not be able to be absorbed from the blood vessel. Okay, and that leads to the situation like diabetes, where you have to take extra insulin to ensure that function does happen. Now, insulin and glucagon secretion, it's a very interesting negative feedback loop. So, after a meal, the blood glucose increases, islet of Langerhans cells secrete insulin. At this time, glucagon secretion, if you remember, the glucagon is coming from here, okay? Alpha cell secreting glucagon and beta cell secreting insulin. So, there is a opposite function. When glucagon is increasing, insulin will fall down. When insulin will increase, glucagon will fall down. So, insulin secretion increase, glucagon secretion decrease, and the glucose moves from the blood into the cells. This is exactly I was telling you, the glucose has to be removed from the blood and has to be used for formation of the glycogen. Whereas, when between the meals blood glucose level decrease, the islet of Langerhans cells started secreting the glucagon and insulin secretion is now lowered down, and glucagon, what it does, it breaks down the glycogen and release glucose into the system for energy consumption. So, it is a opposing function which is happening. So, diabetes mellitus, so it is basically type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune attack on the beta cells of the pancreas, whereas type 2 is a combination of insulin resistance and insulin deficiency. Okay. So, now coming back to the glucose homeostasis, this is pretty much a repetition of what I have shown you just now, how the glucose is being taken up. This is the entry of the glucose and then converting glucose into glycogen and sometimes converting into triglyceride stores. Okay. Now, this is where the overall scenario of the nervous system, and this is the important part, it comes, the sympathetic and parasympathetic, fight or flight. So, nervous system could be divided in two parts. So, this is one part which I did not cover. Now, I wanted to get back to that, the sympathetic and parasympathetic controls. So, central nervous system, we talked about the brain, we talked about the spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system, you have the motor system, sensory system. Motor system can be further divided into somatic nervous system, autonomic nervous system, and within autonomic nervous system, you have sympathetic system and you have parasympathetic system. The reason to introduce it is, this is the parasympathetic and sympathetic system which is involved in stimulating glucose release. Now, look at here, inhibits digestion, stimulates digestion. There are opposite action, parasympathetic and sympathetic will have opposite action. In order to show this, so I left that part of the digestive of the nervous system to bring it here. Intestine, which is stimulate peristalsis. Similarly, here intestine inhibits peristalsis and secretion. So, you see there are opposite reactions. Salivary, it is stimulate parasympathetic, stimulate salivation. Here sympathetic is opposing salivation. So, if you look at the whole thing, there are nervous controls which are helping in the whole digestive process, and this is the chain of sympathetic and parasympathetic which is running along with the spinal cord. Okay. So, this is where we will close in this class before we move on to the next class, where we will talk about the rest of the other systems. So, this pretty much covered much of your digestive system as well as the endocrine system, what we needed to learn for this course. Thank you.